Hello everybody, welcome back to my little corner of the internet where I will talk about the stories of my life, my work both as a comic book author and a translator, my cats Hey Hey and Serengeti, and the occasional movie, book or TV series review and recommendation, as well as some rants if the feeling hits. Now, today's subject usually would go to More Chainsaws Needed because, well, it's one of the most famous horror manga in the last decade or so. However, not only More Chainsaws Needed, it's a bit busy right now with the classic Universal monsters. We're not going to talk about the horror in Uzumaki per se, but about how the narrative of the manga is built, because I believe that while yes, Junji Ito is a master of modern horror, he's also a master of narrative and pacing in manga form. Something that doesn't easily translate to anime or live action, and more importantly, that a lot of people seem to take for granted. So, while we will talk a little about how the narrative helps to create the horror and suspense that the plot gives us, our main subject will be exactly how Junji Ito tells us the story of a town haunted by the concept of the spiral, rather than what is Junji Ito telling us with it. Ready for this? Let's talk about Junji Ito's Uzumaki. Believe it or not, horror is one of the hardest genres to do in comic book form. Gore is easy, in the sense that if you know how to draw guts, blood, and horrible monsters, well, you are set for life. But true horror, the kind that makes the reader shudder, close the book, and not want to sleep with the lights off, that is very hard to pull off. Part of it is because of the effect that Stephen King called the closed door effect in his book Dance Macabre, an excellent essay about horror, gore, and the history of the genre up to the early 80s. There, he talks about how in a movie, you can build suspense by having the character go up the stairs towards a closed door, behind which you can hear the monster. How, right up until the door is opened, you are primed to jump, no matter what it is behind it, because your imagination is already doing the heavy work of imagining what horrible thing is behind that door. However, when the door opens, no matter what horrible thing is behind it, you are relieved, because no matter what is behind the door, whatever you were imagining was 1,000 times worse. Because comics are a graphic medium, well, it's pretty much impossible to keep the monster secret for a long time. Sooner or later, you are going to have to draw them. And depending on your style and the reader's mood, sometimes the reveal might ruin the whole atmosphere you built up to that point. And if you go for the more brainy psychological horror, well then, you better be a great writer, because no matter what your style is going to be the script what sinks or saves you. This brings us to Uzumaki, which probably has the biggest high concept premise you have heard in a horror manga or comic in a long while. Get this. It's about a town, Kurousucho, who happens to be haunted by the geometrical concept of the spiral. Yes, I say the geometrical concept of the spiral. Not a giant spiral or a monster in the shape of a spiral, but the spiral concept itself. It starts slow, like when you fall in a whirlpool edge, with small obsessions taking the hearts of some inhabitants of the village. Small obsessions like, for example, in the case of Shuichi Sato's father, collecting anything with a spiral pattern. And when I say anything, I mean anything. From kimonos to mosquito repellent. If it has a spiral, then Shuichi's father wants it. This, however, is not well seen by his wife, or his son Shuichi. In fact, the first person to notice the haunting happening at the town, because he's one of the very few people who studies outside town, is Shuichi, because he's able to see the difference between outside and inside. He still stays, because he wants to convince his girlfriend, Kirigoshima, to escape with him, but at least he knows what he's in for, more or less. When his mother throws away his father's collection, it's already too late for his father. His obsession has grown to the point where he can make spirals in his body. And I don't mean tattooing spirals, although he probably did that, and we didn't know. He twists his tongue into a snail shape and makes his eyes swirls in opposite directions, and if that is not terrifying, what happens next is. Because one day he receives a big circular tub in the mail, big enough to hold a human body. And what happens next is the stuff of nightmares. So now that we have the plot explained, somewhat, because trust me, that was just the beginning of the horror, let's talk about how Junji Ito managed to bring said horror perfectly to the page of his 3-volume manga and how he managed to make it a perfect narrative spiral. What do I mean with this? Well, simple. The narrative catches you like a spiral would, starting on the outside very, very slow and little by little getting faster and faster as the episodes go on. Not only that, this is also repeated in each episode. They start slow, but once the spiral makes a formal apparition, it speeds up until the end, and each episode has a shorter, slow start until there are no more short starts. We are deep in the story and unable to escape. This is, of course, the grand scale of things. But let's go back to the beginning with the slow build of the atmosphere. It's easy to miss in the first read, but every single page at the beginning has at least one spiral hidden in the background. By the end, they are no longer hidden. They are all around you. Yeah, sure, we remember the big spreads with, say, Suichi's father collection of spirals, or what he really did with the circular tube he got. But it's harder to remember than when we first meet Kirie. The grass around her is in spiral shapes, and there are spirals in the sky hidden in the clouds. Of course, once you see them, it's impossible not to notice them. Their presence draws your eyes to them, just as it does with the people in the cursed town. Once the curse is known to the readers, the spirals become more and more obvious. By the 4th chapter in the 1st volume, you are already primed to look for them, afraid of where they will turn up and what effect will they have on the victims of the week. Which brings us, of course, to the big shots of each episode. The one panel, that moment when we are going to see the detailed art of Junji Ito's work in the most disgusting, hypnotizing way possible. I am actually a bit sad that some of those, what Suichi's dad did on the tube, the girl with the scar in her forehead, the snail people, hair going insane, to name a few, have been spoiled without context in the internet for a lot of people. But even when you know it's coming, they are still incredibly powerful. Of course, they also have the very visceral effect that they make you dizzy. Due to the huge number of spirals, both obvious and hidden, this image can cause the same effect of nausea that you are sure the witnesses are suffering. In this regard, one of my favorite scenes is the poor house shattering in volume 3. I am not going to describe it, you should experience it by yourself, but it was the very first image of Uzumaki I ever saw, and I still haven't gotten over the instant vertigo I felt when I opened the magazine where it was printed. Finally, going back about the narrative, it is very important to note that the first 2 volumes are made of one-shot chapters, where one assumes things will go back to normal for a bit in the town and the spiral only affected a few individuals. But as soon as we pick up volume 3, everyone gets involved and every chapter is part of the longer narrative as each picks up where the last ended until the very sudden end. Now that we have talked about how the story is built, let's go back to the story and how it managed to be so effective despite the initial strangeness. One may even say ridiculousness of the premise. Because let's be honest, we are still talking about a geometrical concept haunting a town, which is both ridiculous and the most cosmic horror you can get. Monsters are one thing, but we always figure out a weakness or at least manage to explain them by comparing them to other creatures on Earth, and sooner or later someone is going to make a story in which the monster is the poor victim, and that's how we end up with Twilight. But how do you anthropomorphize a mathematical concept? One of the biggest strengths of Uzumaki is that Junji Ito never tries to give the curse an actual body. The closest we get to that is a hurricane that falls in love with Kirie in volume 2, but the storm is still a storm. Not a storm that turns into a human, but a storm. No mouth, no voice, nothing to it but the weather. Even when the monster of the week starts as a human being, like the Spiral Scar Girl, the Snail People, or the Medusa Harry Girl, we never get the feeling that they are to blame for their monstrous transformation. They are not the spirals, they don't become slaves to the spiral, they just change. Some die, some survive in their new forms, but they are never actually evil in their actions, in their own minds. They don't go from I am a good human to wahaha, I'm going to serve the spiral and destroy everyone in the town. They are, just like Suichi and Kiri, victims of the real monster, the one we can't see but still feel its effects and the small clues all over town, all over the story. Let's take, for example, Scargirl, as she is in chapter 4, and thus talking about her doesn't bring too many spoilers to the table. Her actual name is Asami Kurotani, and she is a popular girl that everybody thinks is really, really pretty. And, well, yes, Junji Ito draws her very pretty, a little bit like he will draw Tommy in future volumes of Tommy, another one of his great horror stories. Not only that, when we meet her, she's quite friendly. But to Kirie and to all the other girls in the school, she's not a stuck-up B-word. There is a rumor that she has a crescent scar in her forehead that makes all the boys fall in love with her, but Asami insists that's not true. She does have a crescent scar that she got when she was trying to impress a boy she liked, but she doesn't think it has supernatural powers. It's just a casualty that she has never had bad luck with romance ever since she got that scar. But then she goes with Kiri to visit Suichi, who has pretty much become a hermit after what happened to his parents, and let's be honest, we don't blame him. She gets a very different reaction from him. It's not that he doesn't like her, it's that he's terrified of her, calling her corrupted by the spiral, if not the spiral herself. And that is what makes everything worse, because of course it does. Being rejected is something that Asami is not used to, so she becomes obsessed with Shuichi, going to visit him every night, begging him to see her because she can't live knowing that he hates her. And the first night, Shuichi reveals something terrible to her. Or, well, more likely to the readers because she doesn't see why it's horrible. Her crescent scar is no longer a crescent. It's a tiny spiral. And it's growing. The tragedy is that at this point, Asami is completely lost even if she doesn't know it. What is going to happen to her is quite terrifying, but right now, at this point, she's already gone. There is absolutely nothing she, Shuichi, or Kiri can do to stop the spiral from growing and consuming her, even if she realizes what is happening, because we never know why she is corrupted by the spiral. It's not that she got obsessed with Shuichi, because by the time she met him, she was already touched by it according to him, and he's pretty good at figuring out who is touched by the curse and who isn't. He does want her to leave town, probably hoping that it will stop the spiral from growing in her, but we will later know that she'd not get far even if she had listened. Kurosu Cho and the spiral have that way to capture their victims, and once you are even slightly touched, you can escape. After all, that is why Shuichi and Kiri never think about actually leaving. They are mostly untouched, they make plans to leave, but they are affected enough that actually leaving is never actually on the table. They stay, and they stay until it's too late for anyone. Even as her left eye is torn away from her, from Asami, going back to her, when she has become so obsessed with Shuichi that she doesn't care that he's Kiri's boyfriend and is ready to steal him from her, she's still presented somewhat sympathetic. She's unsure of what's happening to her, but unable to stop it. And more importantly, while she does kill a guy by absorbing him into the spiral, she doesn't do it on purpose. And it only happens minutes before she's absorbed too. She's a victim, all the time, and this marks the making of a great story. We feel bad for almost all of the spiral's victims, because they are nothing but innocent bystanders caught in a storm. If you like horror and manga, you owe it to yourself to read Uzumaki. There is an animated series done by Drive and co-produced by Productions IG USA and Adult Swim coming, soonish, we hope. However, Ito's work has had very bad luck with animated adaptations, And the less we talk about the Uzumaki live action, the better. So I really have to insist that you go to the manga first so you can really experience the true horror of the spiral and the mastery of Ito's narrative and art. I want to thank my dear patrons Mitch Hyman, Elaine Ho, Jessica, and Ali Riley, as well as my first supporter Tanya Pineda and the most amazing Amy Song, without whom none of my videos would be possible. I also want to remind you that if you want to support these and my other projects and get your name mentioned here, you can do so at patreon.com/Adalisa, written link on description, as I know my name can be hard to spell. And with just $1 a month, you will always be thanked in my videos, as well as get access to a ton of art before anyone else, and get the chance to suggest future subjects for videos too. You can also support me through Ko-fi, and for each coffee, you will get mentioned here in 3 future videos. If you can support me this way, I will also accept likes, subscriptions to the channel, and of course, you sharing the links. I also welcome all your questions, feedbacks, and suggestions in the comments below. This was Adalisa Zarate, and I will see you soon so we can grab another cup of coffee and talk about, well, something a little bit different, in a completely different genre, and a completely different country. We're going to talk about the Telugu film Rangashtalam.